And I really want to thank our sponsors for this evening, Newport Academy, and you're going to hear from somebody from Newport in just a moment, but we're really grateful to them for supporting this program. We are a nonprofit organization, and we rely on support from lots of different organizations, agencies, and individuals. So thanks very much to Newport Academy. And you're going to hear a little bit more about them in just a moment. So onto our program. I thought before we got started with Corey, our first presenter, I would give you just a little bit of foundation about what we're talking about. These are terms that you might hear this evening. They're similar but different. So a dual diagnosis, I'm not going to read this verbatim to you, but you can take a look at this. And this PowerPoint and the other folks' PowerPoints and the video are all going to be available, so you can take more time to look through this. This is a definition that comes from the National Alliance for Mental Illness, or NAMI. And comorbidity is really looking at two or more disorders or illnesses occurring in the same person simultaneously or sequentially. That comes from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And co-occurring disorders, I think this is probably maybe it's the most frequently used term. I'm not sure. We'll talk about it tonight. But NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, says that as many as 6 in 10 substance abusers or misusers also have at least another mental health disorder. And as you're going to hear, substance use disorders are a mental health challenge. So we really look at them as multi-dimensional problems that could be a variety of different things. I think most clinicians that I talk to would say the numbers are higher than this. It's probably more than 6 in 10, but it's very hard, as you're going to hear. It's a little bit challenging to always know concretely what's happening with somebody. So first we're going to hear from Corey Griffin tonight. She's a therapist from Newport Academy. And then Corey, I'll have you kind of just introduce Michael because you guys are kind of connected. So those two are going to be focusing on the adolescent or young adult population. I don't know, Corey, if you would say under 18 or under 21. I'll let you explain that, but we're going to look at that population first, and then we'll get into kind of more the adult population and also how family members can be really informed about how to navigate these systems and this kind of treatment. Hearing from Patrick Dowling, who's a professional counselor, as well as Kathy, who's a parent whose child is in recovery from co-occurring disorders. So I'm going to turn this over now to Corey Griffin. Thanks, Corey.
Thank you, Kim. I'm just going to share my screen here. 1 second. Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Corey Griffin. I am from Newport Academy. It is a privilege to be speaking with you all this evening in regards to a little bit about my knowledge of what we do here at Newport Academy. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and here at Newport, I am an individual therapist. I work on the girls' campus. In regards to, Kim said about their ages, we see primarily here, I would say the majority of our clients is about 13 to 20-year-olds. So that is, when I'm speaking tonight, I'm speaking from the experience of working with that age group. So I know we have a lot to get to, so I will go ahead and get started. Okay, so starting with some basic facts, alcohol, marijuana, and tobacco are the substances that are most commonly used by adolescents. By 12th grade, we know that about 2/3 of students have tried alcohol, about half of 9th through 12th grade students have reportedly tried marijuana, and about 40% of 9th through 12th grade students have reportedly tried cigarettes. Now, since about 2010 or so, cigarette smoking has been on the decline, and that's been across all ages. So it's kind of given way to this new generation of vaping, right? E-cigarettes alternatively have become more popular than any other tobacco product. Trends also show that adolescents who have been using vaping, Juuls, e-cigarettes are doing so as top reasons they report because they taste good or because everybody else is doing it. So we sort of see a lot of peer pressure in that aspect. Signs of substance use. So what to look for specifically for parents. How do you know that your child is struggling with a substance use disorder or a decrease in their functioning at home due to substances. So the following are some behaviors reportedly given by family members as well as clients themselves. Getting high or intoxicated on a regular basis, that's one of the more obvious ones. Lying, especially about if or how much they are using, because of course they're not going to tell parents the truth, because if they tell them the truth, then they're going to take away their main coping skill, right? Avoiding friends or family members, giving up activities they used to enjoy, which could be spending time with loved ones, family, or friends. Talking a lot about drugs or alcohol, believing they need to use or drink in order to have fun. That's a big one. I think that plays in part to the kind of culture, the social media culture as well, which I'll get to. Taking risks such as sexual risks, driving under the influence, getting in trouble at school, suspension for substance related incidents. Also a lot of physical stuff. So weight loss, constant fatigue, red eyes, little concern for hygiene. And then some of the mental health stuff. So feeling less motivated, not willing to get out of bed, feeling depressed, hopeless, suicidal feelings. Okay. So risk factors, parents may be wondering, why my kid, right? What makes my kid more vulnerable than any other kid? So studies have long shown that genetic vulnerability, family history, psychological factors, environmental factors, they all contribute to the development of a teen substance use disorder or mental health disorder. Teens who are victims of physical, sexual, or psychological abuse, here at Newport, we place big importance on past trauma. So working with clients on any past trauma that they may have experienced, physical, sexual, psychological, verbal trauma. Bullying could play a big part in why teens or adolescents that suffer with mental health problems are at higher risk for substance use disorder. It's the art of self-medicating, right? A lot are turning to substances in order to make themselves feel better. So if I have anxiety, let's say, I have racing thoughts, my heart is beating, I know that those are some of my physical symptoms. I know that alcohol, which slows the central nervous system, that will calm me down, that will make me feel better. And that is why, in the short run, at least, right? Because it works in the short run. And that is why a lot of teens turn to substances. New trends also show how American culture, the media's glamorization of smoking, drinking, other drug use normalizes teen substance use. It makes the temptation to experiment much greater. New trends, like I said before, with social media, quicker access to celebrities, quicker access to famous rappers, musicians, idols. There's more marketing and more attention to the drug or alcohol lifestyle. And it sort of normalizes it as, phone addiction and more of our teens, we see them on their phones, kind of seeing this message that it is normal to use substances on a day-to-day basis. Prevalence of co-occurring disorders. So we learned what the definition of what a co-occurring disorder already is. So estimated rates of co-occurring mental health conditions here among adolescents with substance use range from 60 to 75%. So that's more than half. That is a lot. From what we learned so far, it is quite common for teens who are struggling with psych problems to turn to drugs, alcohol to help them manage those difficult and distressing feelings. So again, the self-medicating, it's almost like a survival skill in the moment. Teens who turn to substances to do so cope quite simply because it works in the short term, especially if they're not being properly medicated, if they're not seeing a psychiatrist, if they don't know that there's medications out there that can help them, they're going to turn to the quickest thing that they know that has helped them and it works, to alleviate some of those unwanted mental health symptoms such as hopelessness, anxiety, irritability, negative thoughts, low self-esteem, poor body image. But what goes up must come down, right? So in the long run, substance use will actually exacerbate those symptoms, making it much more difficult to manage as teens grow into adulthood. So when it comes to survival skills, it's that very same thing that they believe is helping them survive in the moment. In the long run, it's actually making things much worse for them. So their progression from experimentation to abuse or dependence is going to be much more likely to occur in adolescents who already struggle with mental health issues. Okay, so parents wonder, my kid's already struggling with the depression, with mental health. Why did they have to put drugs on top of that and make it even much worse, right? It's almost a perfect storm. Well, like I said, they're doing it because they found their out. They found their way that is helping them. So from what testimonials we hear, right? With anxiety, like I said, the racing thoughts in the mind running a mile a minute. Drugs and alcohol can quiet the mind. Social anxiety, if their friends are doing it, it's a way to fit in and not feel as stigmatized. We hear all the time, well, I tried it because my friends were doing it. Or we hear all the time when clients are leaving here, we do a lot of work, how to navigate some of those relationships at home. But all my friends use, so how am I going to possibly be able to go back to my friend group, right? And it's a healthy concern to have. That's a healthy fear. We want them to have that fear, because if they go back to doing what they always done with the same group, they're going to find themselves fall right back into those same patterns. Depression, it can temporarily raise endorphin levels, allowing teens to feel carefree, relaxed. Low self-esteem helps them feel less alone. Again, it's that inclusion feeling. We all want to feel included, right? I've worked with so many young girls that say, once I found marijuana, I was finally able to open up. I finally felt like I have friends. So it's kind of across the board. It's a very common testimonial that we hear. Bipolar disorders, drugs, alcohol alleviates the ups and downs, the dramatic mood swings. Post-traumatic stress disorder produces lower levels of endorphins and a healthy brain. Again, allows them to feel happy. Eating disorders suppresses the appetite, especially common when it comes to substances that are stimulants, right? Because it suppresses the appetite and helps them kind of take their mind off food. So ADD, ADHD, individuals with undiagnosed ADD or ADHD might turn to these potentially self-destructive means of kind of placating some of their symptoms. So the inattention, the hyperactivity, the impulsivity. We see them, teens or adolescents, abusing alcohol, marijuana, drugs, but also cocaine is a very commonly abused drug in this population. Cocaine is going to give a paradoxical reaction or a paradoxical effect. So what this means is when a substance will give an opposite effect that it would normally be expected. So for example, a paradoxical reaction would be a pain that is caused by a pain medication, right? So if an individual who has an undiagnosed attention deficit disorder or has never been treated for the disorder, never taken proper medication for the disorder, then starts to abuse cocaine, it's going to give that seemingly paradoxical calming effect. Whereas for an individual that doesn't have attention deficit, it may make them, work a million miles a minute. The opposite's going to happen for the individual that does have the attention deficit disorder. So it can lead to them finally being able to focus in school, to increase productivity. And for that reason, it's a popular drug abused amongst this population. Okay, so the dangers of self-medicating. Self-medicating works to, again, temporarily alleviate the symptoms. Temporarily is the big word here, that in the long run, it's going to make the symptoms much more exacerbated. It's going to cause them to be much worse, okay? And then the teens will then feel much worse when they don't have the substance in them. So they feel the need to have to keep on using in order to feel better, or to feel the way that the drug originally made them feel. Another negative effect is that it undermines any treatment the teen may be receiving, diminishes their engagement levels. If they're taking any kind of medication, the medication targets the same areas of the brain that drugs or alcohol would. Drugs or alcohol are much more potent, so it's going to cancel out the effects of the medication. Psychosis. So according to NAMI, psychosis refers to an episode in which an individual experiences a break from reality. So the two most common symptoms we see with psychosis are delusions and hallucinations. So delusions, you can read that, and hallucinations are auditory or visual. So hearing or seeing things that are not actually there. There has been some debate over the causal link between drug use and the development of psychosis, sort of like a what came first, the chicken or the egg type situation. However, it is well established that the course of psychosis is adversely affected by substance misuse, so resulting in a much more prolonged episode. So alcohol and nicotine, cannabis, they are predominantly substances used by clients with psychotic disorders. research shows that the drug use has the potential to trigger psychotic episodes as well, symptoms, for those who have underlying predisposition to psychotic disorders. So it can almost wake up the illness if you are somebody that is, if the teen is somebody that is abusing drugs or alcohol. It can give way, it can make it happen much quicker. Abusing drugs can also elicit the symptoms that mimic a mental illness. So for example, some individuals that use excessive marijuana, even using once a week, every week for 1 year, can start to give rise to some psychotic symptoms. In the case of substance-induced psychosis, so that's more of a one-time episode, one-time use, the obvious cure is to stop using. However, the reality is could be much harder to break, right? The symptoms of mental illness can become unbearable to the point that the afflicted individuals begin to self-medicate. Okay. So now that we know all this, the teen or adolescent or individual may be willing to get help. What do we look for in a treatment center? Many treatment centers say that they treat dual diagnosis, but what exactly does that mean? So it's very important to find a treatment center that is going to give an individualized treatment plan that targets both substance use and mental health simultaneously, rather than a plan that treats them separately. Why do we do this, right? The importance is that it is very difficult to treat a mental health condition with somebody who is actively using drugs. And it is very difficult to encourage somebody to get off drugs, to get sober, if they are struggling with severe depression or another mental health condition. So treating them both concurrently is going to be our safest and most successful bet for a better outcome. The best setting for treatment is a structured, safe environment of a residential treatment center, such as Newport. Removing an individual from the environment, which has all their triggers, which has all their temptations, is going to be the best bet for somebody to kind of stay off substances, right? Of course, we can't get access to that. They can't get access to that when they are here. It usually takes about 30 days to break a habit. So after 30 days, we can start to see how a person is going to react at their baseline without any substances involved. We can start to see them starting to feel better. I can't tell you how many clients will tell me after 30 days, it's amazing. I suddenly feel so good. I don't have depression. I thought I was depressed. I'm not actually depressed. Well, depending on the substance you were using, let's say you were using alcohol. Alcohol is a depressant. So very likely it was the substances you were putting in your body that was causing you to feel that way, not because you were truly struggling with depression in and of itself. So it's so important that they are in an environment where they don't have access to those temptations, which they might have at home. Learning healthy coping skills. Here at Newport, we offer alternative types of therapies, MMA, equine therapy, art, music therapy, all on top of their individual sessions, their counseling sessions, and their family sessions. Okay. Programs should offer treatment stays that are long enough to fully address the complicated nature. 2 weeks isn't going to cut it. 90 days is not going to be a cure. Usually the longer the better. Of course, it's very difficult to make that decision to send your teen away for a substantial amount of time, but that's going to produce the best results. Evidence-based treatment is paramount. And then when deciding on a treatment center, choose one that specializes in adolescent addiction. If you're working with an adolescent here, I believe everybody uses for different reasons. We all have different triggers to our self-destructive behaviors, but adolescents and teens are sort of in their own grouping with some of the pressures that they face in and of itself. And then just lastly, some questions to ask when researching treatment centers. These could be helpful for you. So asking the center, do you offer that individualized treatment plan for all clients? My kid is different than any other kid there. Maybe they all struggle with similar issues, maybe similar battles, but no two are the same. So making sure that treatment plan is going to take time, that therapist is going to take time to work on that treatment plan with my kid. That's going to be most important. Is therapy structured to treat dual diagnosis? Will my loved one be evaluated by a licensed mental health professional before admission? So who is the team? Who works there, right? Who am I putting my kid in the hands of? It's so important to know the many members that create a treatment team when they are receiving help at the residential level. If I relapse after treatment, how would that be handled? So here at Newport, at least, we do a lot of contracting with the family before the individual's leaving. So making sure they're set up for safety once they're home, or at least creating a plan to address all this. What will happen? All the what ifs. While they might be scary, it's very important to talk about. Does your facility offer aftercare referral services? So setting them up with some kind of aftercare program. It is very difficult to go from 24/7 structured care to absolutely nothing. So, starting at this level of care, we usually encourage going down to a PHP, partial hospitalization level of care, which could then be followed by an IOP level of care, which could then be followed by weekly individual therapy, whatever that might look like. Everybody is different, but making sure something is set up, because it is very difficult to go from this structured environment to absolutely nothing. And depending on where you send your kid to treatment, here at Newport, at least we make sure they are all set up for success, at least when they get home. So that is a little bit about my knowledge of what we do here in the co-occurring world at Newport Academy, at least. Thank you for letting me share all that. I know there are some questions that come in, and we will address them at the end, but I will introduce Michael now. He wants to take away. Let me just stop sharing the screen.
Hello, my name's Michael Valerie. I'm also from Newport Academy. I'm an alumni of Newport Academy. I received treatment there in 2016. However, kind of my journey with mental health and comorbidity and co-occurring disorders, the journey of that was long before 2016. I guess I can start by sharing, looking back now, I can now recognize I had been experiencing anxiety at the young age of being in first grade. And I can now realize that because I've done a lot of self-reflection and I've gone through this journey for quite a while. But in first grade, I went to a very strict Catholic school. I had a lot of pressure I felt a lot of pressure as a first grader, and I would almost always break down and have kind of temper tantrums, and I couldn't handle the workload that we were given. And now looking back, I'm like, wow, that was really my first break with what I now know to be anxiety. However, obviously my story progresses. I grew up with a mom and a dad, and an older brother. We grew up very well. We never really struggled, so seemingly there shouldn't be really anything to worry about, at least from an outside perspective. And I'm very grateful for that. However, as years went on, in middle school, I recall kind of feeling lesser than, feeling kind of on the outskirts of like all my said friend groups. I never felt really connected with a certain group of kids my age. And that transferred into going from 8th grade to my freshman year of high school. My freshman year of high school, I joined the cross country team, kind of just as a way to get involved. I was also involved in band, and I played multiple instruments, but I wanted to do something athletic, so I joined the track team. Long story short, I somehow figured out I was a really good runner, and I was put on the varsity track team as a freshman, which means I was mostly around upperclassmen, kids that were aged up to 18 years old, and I was 13, 14 years old. And that group of kids kind of became my friend group at the time. And it also added to the fact that I had an older cousin who was a senior when I was a freshman, so I kind of hung out with her and her friends. So my freshman year, I was introduced to alcohol due to the fact that I was hanging out with kids who were preparing to go to college, getting ready. And that was kind of my first go around. And I remember the minute I started drinking, I was like, oh, this is super fun. Like, I'm having such a good time. I'm hanging out with all these older kids. Like, this is genuinely something I've never really felt before. However, my family does have a history with mental illness and alcohol abuse disorders. So I was able to recognize that. And I remember saying to myself, I don't want to be like the rest of my family. I don't want to be like my mother. I want to stop drinking. So I thought I was going to be successful at that. So I did it for a little bit, and my genius thought was, you know what, I'll start using drugs rather than drinking. That's better. That was my thought process. So I started smoking marijuana, and obviously I started drinking again. It came right back. As soon as I went to a party or as soon as I went out, it came right back. But I started smoking, and I guess I'll say I went through a pretty typical progression of kind of what would lead to like a substance abuse or substance misuse disorder. I started with weed, and I made my way through pills such as Xanax, Adderall, Oxys, and I made my way to cocaine, and started using drugs intranasally. And I eventually started using LSD and other hallucinogens pretty regularly. I was using LSD quite a bit, and that's kind of when at my really low bottom is when I started using hallucinogens. However, if I were to backtrack a little bit, going into my junior year of high school, I remember I reached out to my parents. I said, Mom, Dad, I think I'm depressed. I think I'm experiencing anxiety. Is there any way, like, maybe I can start going to therapy or something, figure it out? I wanted to be proactive regarding the feelings I was experiencing. And I vividly remember from my mother, her saying, Michael, you're being melodramatic, and had a slew of explanations as to why I was being melodramatic. And, my mom is a very strict, very serious person. She is very academia oriented. Her whole family went to Ivy League schools. They're the top-notch student that you could think of. And I had all this pressure on her. So she perceived my struggles as me trying to avoid doing my college application or writing my college essay. So the first time I reached out for help, I kind of got shot down by my mom, and my dad didn't really add anything into the conversation, and that was that. So that kind of fueled the fire. I took that and basically started using more. And going into my senior year of high school, I was probably using the most I've ever used. And it was all over the board. I had a drug to go to sleep. I had a drug to eat. I had a drug to wake up. I had a drug for fun. I used different drugs for literally anything I wanted. And I was able to figure out a way to make it work, per se. But ultimately, it led to disaster. By my 14th day of senior year, I decided, you know what, I have no aspirations of going to college. I actually don't want to do any of that, and I'm stopping going to senior year. So by my 14th day, I told my parents I'm not going to school anymore. And obviously there was a huge uproar, and they reached out to the school district, and we found a way to keep me in school. So I eventually actually started homeschooling, because at that time I had been being treated by a psychiatrist for anxiety and depression. I had started medications, and I wasn't really feeling per se better, mainly because I was still using illicit drugs on top of it. So I wasn't really getting any positive effects from my psychiatric meds. but I started getting homeschooled, and that was all good and dandy for quite a while until I realized you can skip homeschool. And I did that by just not going to home. My home at that point in time was my least favorite place on the planet. You know, I had a really ruptured relationship with my mother, and my dad, I'd say the same. My brother had been out of the house by then. He's 5 years older than me, so he was, I think he was finished with college by then. So basically I had stopped going to homeschool, and my parents were really kind of at their wits' end. They didn't know what to do. Therapy wasn't really working. The psychiatric drugs weren't working. So they found Newport Academy, and by January 7th of 2016, I went to Newport. I went to the residential treatment center in Bethlehem, and I stayed there for 53 days. And at first it was very rough. The first week I slept all the time. I refused all my meals. I was wildly underweight, and I was very inactive in treatment. And I think by like the second or third week, I had this realization that, you know, a way to get out of here quicker is just do what they want. So I started abiding by all the rules. I started doing all of what they asked, being honest in my sessions, and it paid off for me. You know, deep down, I always knew that I wanted a relationship with my mom. I wanted to have a good life. I wanted all of that, but what was in front of me was all of the difficult work that you have to do in order to get there. So I had spent 53 days in the residential, and I left the residential with immediately, I got my phone, and I had the idea, you know, I'm going to text all my old friends, and immediately when I get back, we're all going to go and get high. Luckily for me, Newport and my parents had different arrangements, and I went straight to a PHP program in Darien, Newport's PHP program. And that was kind of the second part of my journey with Newport. And I actually stayed at their IOP PHP program for over a year. I graduated high school on time and sober. By the time I graduated high school, I think I had 6 months sober. So that was a really big accomplishment for me. And I remember at that time, I was kind of like, oh, I don't want to waste 6 months of sobriety for one night of fun. So I'm going to get to a year, and at a year, I'm going to reevaluate how I feel about this whole sobriety thing. And it must have been a month and a half to 2 months after. So say 8.5 months, I realized, whoa, like my life is so great. I have such a clear head. And I really started to kind of enjoy and appreciate my sobriety. You know, I took a gap year. I didn't go right into college. And honestly, for me, that was one of the best things I could have ever done. So I took a gap year, and I got some sobriety under my belt, and kind of prepped myself and developed healthy coping mechanisms in order for me to withstand the difficult environment of a college campus. And you know, today I would say I'm a rising senior in college. I study neuroscience and chemistry, and in the future, I would like to go to medical school, get my doctorate, and help treat adolescents that were just like me. You know, I'm really passionate about this field, and I actually started working at Newport along my journey of recovery. I've been at Newport for 3.5 years, and you know, I have so much gratitude for Newport Academy, and the least in my head that I can do to pay that back is to give back to the kids that are literally in the same exact place I once was. You know, today I'm unbelievably happy. You know, like I said, I was able to graduate high school sober. I'm in college, and God willingly, in a year, I'll be able to graduate college sober. And my thing is, everyone says getting sober at such a young age is really difficult. And by no means am I saying it's not, because I definitely had a ton of things happen in my sobriety that was not easy to deal with. But being able to say I've been sober since I was 17 years old is a pretty cool thing. And it shows that if I was able to get through those younger years, that's basically almost as difficult as it will ever get when people are just waving drugs and alcohol in your face constantly. Within my college experience, I've been able to publish 3 scholarly articles in the field of behavioral neuroscience. And if I were, it's just crazy to think about, because I always had the thought that by the age of 19, I wouldn't be alive. I was convinced that I wouldn't make it to 19 years old. And here I am turning 22 in November and sober for 4.5 years. So I guess that's kind of where my story ends so far. I just like to say thank you to all the other panelists and Kim. And yeah, thanks.
Wow. Thanks so much, Corey and Michael. Great job. We're really, I think, all feeling a little bit of, codependency with you right now, Michael. I think a lot of us family members can relate to some of the stuff that you were going through. But thank you for sharing that and your transparency. And Corey, thanks for teeing everything up so beautifully. So I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend and trusted colleague, Patrick Dowling.
All right, thanks, Kim. Thanks, Michael, and thank you, Corey, for taking the lead. So I'm a licensed professional counselor in Pennsylvania. I'm a marriage and family therapist by training. I have a private practice in Malvern, now actually Westchester, and I also facilitate the family programming inclusive of the intensive outpatient program and the outpatient programming for Ethos addiction treatment, which is adult addiction treatment. I also do perform interventions in my free time. I sleep. I'm going to walk through a couple of things. I'm going to share my screen and do a little PowerPoint here to talk about, what, if I were to distill this down, what family members can do to be most effective in terms of supporting themselves and also supporting their loved one who has a substance use, mental health issue, or both. So I'm calling this Recovering Integrity. I do a 6-session model via Ethos around family education. And one of the models, it's all based on really recovering integrity and what does that look like. So everything that we do is about restoring integrity to the family system, to each individual. One of our agreements is everybody gets to keep their integrity the whole time. So let's talk about what does that mean. So part of the tasks of recovery for the entire family, if we were to distill that down, recovery from addiction and mental health disorders and enabling, so I wanted to be really clear about those 3 things, is all 3 of those things can be just as impairing. Addiction, mental health disorders, and enabling behavior can be just as impairing, and people relapse on all 3 of those at times. Requires that we tell ourselves the truth. Loving a drug and loving someone who is addicted to a drug causes pain and confusion. Recovering from this requires that we re-examine our definition of, quote, healthy. When the family and the addicted person grow in this understanding, true recovery for everyone becomes possible. So I will tell you, as a clinician, I only refer to programs that have a family program because I feel like we can refer to programs and we're going to do some salient work with the identified, we call it the person of concern. We're going to do some salient work with the person of concern. And if that person of concern is going to return to the same family system with the same rules of engagement that allowed disordered behavior, dysfunction in the first place, we have not actually rendered them better off. So I'm pretty insistent that Newport Academy does a fantastic job. They have family therapists on staff who are tremendous, very impressed. And we only really use programs that do that. So let's talk about how can I be helpful. I used to have, I'm 24 years sober. I used to have a sponsor when I lived in Hawaii for a few years. And he would do two things every week when we got together to do step work or read the big book or whatever. And he would say two things to me every single week. He would start the conversation out with, how can I be helpful? Which was tremendously meaningful to me, that another man showed up for me and just said, how can I be helpful? And somewhere in the conversation, he told me he loved me. And those two things were tremendously impactful. So again, how can we be helpful? How can I be helpful? We ask the loved ones and the addicted person to similarly reflect on their past and current behaviors with two simple questions in the litmus test. Is this behavior kind and loving towards myself and others at the same time? Again, everybody gets to keep their integrity. Is this kind and loving towards myself, and is it kind and loving towards my marital partner, the co-parent, the other siblings involved, the person of concern? And our agreement is that whatever we decide to do should fit all of those criteria. I'm not saying being popular with those parties all at the same time, but is that actually the most kind and loving act? So I think if we rigorously examine that belief system and come up with answers that we believe to be kind and loving both to ourselves, the person of concern, and everybody else immediately involved, we're going to make better decisions. Second question, does this course of action set myself and my loved one up for long-term success? I see this all the time. People come home from treatment. I just got a call yesterday. Johnny, let's call him Johnny. Johnny came home from treatment. Dad calls me, says, hey, I think I need to come in. We have bottom lines. I'm not really holding the bottom lines. I'm like, oh, so you're in relapse. Okay, so you made an agreement to get Johnny home, but you weren't willing to honor that agreement. So frankly, Johnny shouldn't trust you. And neither should you, right? So let's get to the place where you can trust you, where your word means something. And when you say something, you stand behind it. Because addiction and mental health are all about distortions in thinking, right? So if we have a distorted perspective and we, as quote, a healthy person, are changing our perspective to marry up, to accommodate a disordered perspective, we've now sold ourselves out, right? And we've ceded ground to the addiction. So part of this is that we get really clear about our own integrity and our own principles, and we stand on them, period, right? And as we say as parents, you can get your say, but you may not get your way. And that's a big push that I have with families I work with, is recovering their power. And I see a lot of kids driving buses that they're not qualified for. And that's about parents getting restored to their authentic power and having a collaborative relationship that's mutually respectful. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Substance use disorders and mental health disorders cause individuals to depart from their integrity. So if you look at the 11 criteria for a substance use disorder, it is not about how much and how often a person uses. It has nothing to do with that. It's about how feedback resistant is that person, right? Are they getting feedback from their people in their family, from the legal system, from their health, from their psychological health, from their school, from their work? Like, what feedback loop are they ignoring? And the simple example I use is, we would all hope that as seasoned drivers, we self-correct a lot. That's a healthy person. They self-correct a lot. We don't rely on the rumble strip. We don't rely on the guardrail, right? And we don't just grind along that concrete barricade down the highway going, man, things are going awesome, right? We're doing good. It's about how do we accept and receive feedback. So one of the protective factors that we talk about is building a collaborative relationship. We'll talk about that in a slide or two. Building collaborative relationships with the right people. So we make promises to ourselves and others that we are unable to keep. This is because we have lost the ability to control, effectively regulate our substance use, our loved one, our thinking, and our behavior. The person who is in direct relationship with an active substance user is just as impaired, if not more so. The problem is we send the person of concern to treatment, and we say to the family, hey, go to this parent group once a week and let's hope for the best, right? We have taken that ride with them, and the recovery process should be just as intensive, which is why we really push family programming I can't tell you how many dads I've referred to family programming, and this is a little bit of a dig at dads, but I'm a dad. And dads will say, what are we going to accomplish there? And I want to say, well, you're probably going to cry, and you don't really want to do that, right? But you're going to feel feelings. You're going to identify with how you and your family have gotten run over by untreated, unchecked substance use and or mental health issues. And then you're going to find other people who have found real solutions to that. And what have they done effectively to manage that? So our impaired judgment and subsequent actions deprive us of our ability to secure our survival and well-being, exactly like the person who's addicted. This breach of trust with ourselves and others necessarily creates deep interpersonal and intrapersonal conflict. In short, we lie to ourselves and others because we have to lie. Facing the truth seems too painful. So our job as treatment professionals and as parents and as people who support other people in recovery is to help people shoulder the difficult truths and face them and resolve them meaningfully. So this takes a lot of courage. It is easier to put your head in the sand for the short term. It's way easier. This takes a lot of courage and a lot of persistence. Every intervention I ever do, no matter how committed the family is, they call me the night before and say, we think we're making a big mistake. And I say, you're not, you're just scared, and it's okay. And we're going to walk through this. It's going to be all right. Effectively treating chronic health conditions such as addiction and mental health conditions require tremendous courage and persistence. Real recovery takes a long time. 3 to 5 years is a realistic number. Anybody who tells you anything else, don't believe them. This is a long process. It's a long process to wellness. If you're at the point where you're joining this kind of call, this is not an overreaction, right? If you're here on a Wednesday night during a pandemic, this is important. This is serious. I have not yet seen anybody over-treat this issue in their family or under-respond or over-respond. I see a lot of people under-respond and hope for the best and think, oh, we're going to do, as Corey was saying, we're going to do 30, 60, 90 days of treatment and everything's all good. I tell every client that I work with, if we're doing an intervention and or intensive family therapy, the empirical evidence says this. Any treatment, any continuous treatment episode, not necessarily the same level of care, any continuous effort to address significant substance use or mental health disorders, anything that lasts less than 90 days is a waste of time. It's as if you did nothing in terms of efficacy. So what we're saying is this is a chronic condition. It doesn't just go away. Well, we can start making really smart choices via really sound counsel that helps sets us up for the next right move. The gold standard in my mind is internalizing motivation and appropriate confidence. So I see a lot of people, and it was awesome. Michael was talking about this. He went to compliance, right? And we see that all the time. I'm like, oh yeah, he went compliant. He's like, I'm gonna go get a gold star in treatment. We've seen this 100 times, right? I'm gonna get a gold star in treatment. When I get home, I'm gonna do whatever I want. We've seen this movie, right? That's not internalized motivation. That's how do I get out of jail, right? So internalizing motivation and having an appropriate level of confidence, because I think people in early recovery should feel nervous, should feel appropriately anxious and concerned that they may relapse either behaviorally or with substance. That's a real concern. What we want to do is provide mild to moderate stressors that people can resolve successfully and walk away with a realistic perspective that I can be effective. I can affect change. Let me back up a second. We suggest that families persist, that you choose interventions that you can maintain for a significant amount of time. These are chronic conditions. They're not just going to go away. And I often counsel people that if you are going to draw a line in the sand with yourself, with your loved one, with your person of concern, please be prepared to stand behind that line in the sand. The worst thing we can do is reoffend and say, here's my bottom line, and then negotiate our way out of it. Because we have relapsed into my agreements don't mean anything. Right? So we want to affirm that our agreements do mean something, and that when we create a bottom line for ourselves and our loved one, that's a line that we hold even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. Another piece, it's really important to make sure that all family members have a seat at the table, as unchecked, untreated substance use mental health conditions have significant effects for other people. We've seen this with family members who have a significant learning difference. or a physical impairment, cerebral palsy, something, in the family. Other siblings feel the brunt of that because all the attention goes to one family member. I have a family I worked with a couple years ago, wonderful sister, in nursing school, doing great. It wasn't until her brother was a year sober that it was safe enough for her to start breaking down and dealing with the fact that she was holding tremendous fear on a daily basis about her brother overdosing and dying. On a daily basis, she held this, right? So it was really important for her to have a seat at the table. And when those cracks started coming, those fissures, we were able to get her help. She's doing phenomenally well now. Please do not drown yourself trying to save someone else. And I think we all want to jump in and help. And that's appropriate to triage. But it's really important that the family members get appropriate support because you're going to maintain the seat at the table. Hire smart, dedicated people. Seek counsel from very smart and committed people. Ask questions, challenge assumptions. I love when clients don't agree with me. Let's know why we're doing what we're doing so that when you want to relapse and not hold that line, you know exactly why you're holding that line. Not because I said so, not because Newport said so, or XYZ treatment said so, but because it's the right thing to do for you and your family. So advocate, ask questions, be informed consumers, challenge belief systems. Be collaborative. One of the things I say is if you hire smart people, until all the heads in the room are doing this, we're not done cooking. Let's collaborate and make sure that we're all rowing in the same directions. Trust but verify. Addiction and mental health conditions are diseases of distortion. So drug test, verify, I trust you, but I don't trust your disease, right? That's appropriate and normal. I don't think that we should walk out of treatment and have 100% of trust restored. That's not realistic. We encourage you to only make win-win deals. And what that means is making sure that you can stand by whatever agreement you've just made for yourself. I work with a lot of families, and usually moms, I'll say, how are you doing? And they'll tell me how their kid is doing 4 times in a row. And I'll say, no, how are you doing? And they go, oh yeah, I'm a person, right? Like I have feelings in this. And why is that important? Well, 1, you're a human being, but 2, if you function reasonably well in the rest of your life, that's a great, divining rod. That's a great middle ground to set, the cadence for how do we get back to wellness, right? So part of this is making sure that the person of concern is relating back to a healthy family system. And your job as family members, my job, is to be attractive to myself, to my family member. Is this somebody that my loved one would want to relate back to, and why? Last point on that is, when I'm in doubt, use the reasonable person test. They use this in the law. Would a reasonable person agree to this? I've had family members say to me, I have a 14-year-old who we're trying to get to come to your office and do some counseling. I don't know how to get him to come. And I say, you tell him he's getting in the car. He's 14. And I've had parents say, I don't even know I know this. I don't even know why I need a professional to tell me, like I'm telling my 14-year-old, get in the car, we're going to counseling, right? Because you're the parent and you have a lot of lived experience and a lot of gravitas that should come into play. And hopefully they trust you. And if they don't, then let's dig into that. Like where has trust been compromised? So that brings me 8 o'clock. So I'm going to kick it over back to Kim.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Wise words as always. I really appreciate it. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kathy, and I first want to say thank you to the other panelists. You definitely hit all the right nails on the head, and Michael, especially to you. I felt, aside you being a boy, my daughter, the path that you outlined is pretty much the path my daughter did follow as well. But I also want to congratulate the people that are on the participant list right now. You've made the very difficult decision of recognizing that there's an issue with your family, and that was probably the first step to my husband and I recovering from our own daughter's problems with addiction, and getting all the education you can is so important. Our family similar, I got Michael, similar kind of situation. Two-parent family, two children, very middle-class upbringing. And if you ask my daughter, she'll say second grade. You said first, Michael, but second grade, she just didn't feel like she fit in. And we got a few phone calls from the school, and we just said, oh, come on, you're fine. You don't, and they say she's very shy. She doesn't have friends. She follows the lunch lady around the cafeteria. She doesn't want to eat her food. And again, we sort of just kind of brushed it off for her own, that she just grow out of it. And something that my daughter will say, and she says that she's 27 now, and there is a happy ending at this point to the story, but she has told us that she felt that she was born restless, irritable, and discontent. And that's something from the big book. And when you get more education as far as parenting a child with an addiction, you'll understand some of these terms. But when she says that to me, my heart breaks, because I look back and I see some of the signs. And I would hope that as a parent, as you learn more, you can learn from some of the things that we learned along the way. Unfortunately, my daughter started to show signs of mental illness for sure around 7th grade. She started cutting herself. And again, that was something it was completely foreign to me. And I had heard about it, I'd seen the after school specials, but I didn't understand what that meant. And we immediately got her into treatment. But again, I was completely naive. And if I have any advice, which I'll probably give you tons, one of my advice is interview the people that you hire for your not only your children, but for yourself. Some people are more have expertise in different areas. And the first couple of counselors that we had, my daughter was, they weren't prepared for the amount of mental issues that she was exhibiting. And so we didn't find experts in certain things. And I'm going to refer to her largest, or her overreaching mental disability was an eating disorder, is an eating disorder. And that is one of the most difficult psychological issues to deal with. And if you really have to do your homework on the different types of issues, because not every counselor or psychiatrists are, specialists in necessarily the different areas. So during high school, we dealt with a number of unfortunate situations, mostly revolving around the bulimia and restricting, in addition to the cutting. And what was interesting is to speak with my daughter today, when she was introduced, just what Corey was saying, when she was introduced through friends to alcohol, suddenly she felt her inhibitions go away. She felt whole, and she felt like she could be more of what people expected her to be. And it's funny, she went to a very strict girls' Catholic school, and she quickly made friends outside of that environment, and it sort of spiraled out of there, from there. But we did, she was seen by many different psychiatrists. She was diagnosed with many different types of psychological issues, borderline personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, depression, bipolar. And I'm saying that because I didn't know what any of that was. And I didn't understand. And until I started to get my own self in order and take control of my own not problems, but my own reticence towards recognizing that there might be some mental issues going on, things did not start getting better. I'm very involved with an organization called Be Part of the Conversation, and I'm very involved with the parent meetings, and we call it standing in the storm. When you finally, as a parent, recognize that there is a storm going on and that we have to take some control of it, is when you start to get better. And you sort of parallel what your loved one is going through. You hit almost your own rock bottom. For our family, our rock bottom was when my daughter tried to kill herself. And we were shocked into reality. We were sitting in the hospital, and a doctor came in and said, "You two need to leave. She's got some issues that she is playing you. She is doing this for, they were just so strict with us." And they said, "You're going to have to get your own help before she can start getting some help." Consequently, we called friends and we found a place similar to what Corey was talking about. Another place in Connecticut. I don't know where Newport is, but we ended up taking a break from our daughter. She started to get the help she needed, and consequently, during this stay, we found out she was addicted to drugs, to cocaine and alcohol. All this time, we kept putting all our eggs in the eating disorder basket, and we were just looking and looking and looking for help with that. And we sort of saw the signs of the alcohol. The drugs kind of threw us. We saw the signs. She was older. She was 18 by now, and we just thought, oh, she's experimenting. Little did we know that experimentation had really gone too far. And that is when we started to get our own help. It was recommended that we start going to parent meetings. My husband and I started seeing a counselor ourselves, and we started speaking the language that was being spoken at the treatment place where Mary Beth was. And I want to echo something that Patrick said. It is not a 90-day one and done situation. This is a lifelong commitment for you and your entire family. And when I started to recognize that the program that works for Mary Beth after treatment has been the 12-step program through Alcoholics Anonymous. I've gone to Al-Anon meetings. I also go to the parent partnership meetings. But finding a path for you as the parent is so important. And when you start speaking the same language that they're speaking at the treatment centers with your loved one, their ears perk up, and they're great. Well, at least in my case, our daughter was very grateful that we were working to see and to recognize that her anxiety had gotten to this point. Similarly, when the drugs and alcohol, when she got a hold of the program and the recovery of getting her alcoholism and drug addiction under control, the eating disorder waned, as well as the other issues. And I can say now she's on absolutely no psychiatric medicine. She was on every encyclopedia under the book, words in the book on drugs, medicine. And as soon as she's found the recovery program, thankfully, and she follows it, she is a healthy young woman today. But I'm telling you, it's taken years. She'll be 4 years sober in October 4th. And she has just finished her first year of law school. But I'm telling you, it has been a very long journey. But it's been a fantastic journey in the sense that my family is stronger. We've learned how to set boundaries, and we've come to the situation where we recognize that it's not a shameful thing. And we've met amazing parents through the parent partnership meetings, and we don't feel alone. So again, congratulations for being at this meeting tonight. All of us will be willing to help you in any way, and good luck. Thank you.
Holy cow. I'm so grateful to all of you. That was just absolutely amazing. I'm really lucky that I can call Kathy my friend. We got to know each other in those meetings. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, Kathy. And I'm going to invite everybody to start submitting some questions, because we're waiting for your questions. I'm sure you have some. And we do have a few that were asked in advance, but one that I want to kind of get ask Patrick to talk about. Patrick, I love when you have shared in the past about the family member and the person probably of concern wanting to erase the diagnosis. Do you mind touching on that a bit? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, I see families often asking for like a magic bullet. And, Corey talked about that a little bit, and Michael talked about that, like, how did we get here, right? And that's a valid question, but I think any singular answer to that question would be misguided, right? There's a confluence of events that cause mental health issues, addiction issues. There's things that potentiate these things, right? I think that there's a tendency for folks in early recovery to sort of over-identify as an addict or an alcoholic or whatever their mental health diagnosis is. And I think a healthy perspective is, this is a part of me. It doesn't define who I am. And when I take care of this part of me, I can have this other life, right? Like Kathy said, like, I love that. Like, I love hearing like, oh, she's in law school, or, Michael's putting his life, about to graduate. Like, how sweet is that, right? That's the resumption of normal functioning. So that necessarily needs to include this diagnosis, which is just a diagnosis. And if we treat it, you're free to have whatever life you want to have. Like, it's a really sweet deal. If you don't, all bets are off, right? So I think, listen, it took me a whole year of being sober to accept that I was an alcoholic because I didn't like the label. I was absolutely an alcoholic. There was not really a debate about this, right? But I really wanted there to be another truth. And what I have found is having alcoholism has actually benefited my life. It's enriched my life. Being a recovering person is a pretty awesome deal. I have no doubt about why I'm here on this planet, right? I get to help other people. It's pretty cool. So I think part of whatever prejudice we might have about whatever diagnosis might mean, I think it's really important to get in there and hash that out and figure out, what does that really mean? To have a disorder that you treat that doesn't define who you are as a person.
I love that. I just heard somebody in recovery recently say that they resisted that label as well, and now they consider it one of their greatest attributes and their favorite label to call themselves a person in recovery. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I consider myself in recovery as a family member, as somebody who was codependent, also being the parent of someone with an SUD. So yeah, I get it. I love it. And Corey, we have a question for you about what you recommend. I want to make sure I get it right. While the son or daughter is receiving treatment, what do you strongly recommend or suggest for parents to deal with that child who's in treatment and or recovery?
Yeah, I was thinking about it actually as Kathy was speaking, just in the amount of work that she's been able to do on herself in helping her daughter. So, Al-Anon groups are a great resource for that. Educating yourselves as much as possible on the mental health or substance use addiction, whatever the illness is, whatever they are suffering with, to know that their child is not at fault and it's not something that they should be blamed for, not something that they did wrong necessarily. I think that when parents sort of take that approach, it's going to be a huge barrier for them to try to understand their child and make that connection. So, here at Newport, we do a lot of family counseling, and that role, the family's role, is pivotal in the success of the teen. So I would say, Al-Anon meetings, wherever they can get that support, and their own therapy. Not only the therapy that Newport or the treatment center might provide, but their own individual therapists outside of that.
Great. And while we have you, Corey, just wondering also what you think about, someone had asked the question ahead of time, do you believe recovery is possible for an adolescent, presumably who's struggling with substance use, who does not have a structured program? Like, can they find recovery? I mean, it's kind of a difficult question for you to answer.
Yeah.
You work for a treatment program, but
that's okay. I'm a believer that there is no wrong way to get sober. There is no wrong way to find recovery, and what works for one person may not work for another. You know, I didn't mention before, but I'm also a person in recovery, and I clearly believe in the residential treatment structure. I went through one myself. I found it to be hugely successful for me, and now I work at one. So I truly believe in it. But it's not the answer for everybody. Just like 12-step meetings are not for everybody. Just like spirituality and religion as an outlet for recovery is not for everybody. So I do believe that it is possible. It didn't work for me. It might not work for a lot of people, but I wouldn't put anything out of the question. I think that being in a structured setting is the most support you can get. And I think that many of us need the most support we can get when we're going through that.
And would you all say, Patrick, if you want to jump in on this, or anybody, especially if you're talking about a co-occurring disorder, if there is, you know, some other mental health challenge in addition to the substance use, would you not agree that there really should be some kind of treatment modality in place for that person?
So I think especially when you're dealing with a co-occurring disorder, the biggest agenda item in my mind is controlling variables. Right? So Corey was talking about this earlier. If we can take somebody, and Kathy mentioned this too, if we can take somebody who has a lot of variables and put them in a structured environment and see how they relate relative to their peers, relative to where we would hope they would be developmentally, now we can start controlling out some of those variables and see who shows up. That's really hard to do when you still have a lot of variables at play. So this is a lot about controlling variables out. So the longer, let's say we get somebody, you know, 3 months, 6 months sober, and they're still demonstrating or expressing significant mental health issues, well, we've ruled out some of the implications of active, you know, substance use and or early recovery issues. Not entirely, but we've started ruling those out, which means we can start ruling in some other things. So the short version is, I think the deck is stacked against people with mental health and substance use issues. Our job is to stack the deck in your favor, right? So if we can make more resources available to you, why would we not do that, right? I didn't go to rehab. I have no idea why. It was 1996 and it didn't occur to me I should have, and I didn't learn some of the things that people who get to go to rehab do until I was like 4 or 5 years sober. I wish I had, right? But I think that people have this opportunity to dig in, and I see young people in recovery like Michael digging in on stuff that I didn't figure out until I was well into my recovery process. So I think it's a huge asset and it's a huge leg up when people can be fully entrenched and be surrounded by people who do this for a living. You know, you don't have to figure this out on the street. Not that you can't, it just makes it more challenging.
Great. Thank you. Here's a question for Patrick and or Kathy. Setting and even more so holding boundaries is so critical to the family recovery process. Where can parents learn and get trained in the process? I think I can open that up to any of you to answer, actually.
I would read No More Letting Go by Deborah J. I have all my parents read it. It's a great in English. It's not in psychobabble. It's easy to read. You can read it in a week's time. No More Letting Go, Deborah J, J-A-Y. I strongly encourage people to go to the parent support groups. I feel so strongly about this that if people hire us for interventions, they have to go to the parent support groups or we won't work with them, right? Because it's a waste of time, because they're not going to get adequate support and they're going to relapse on things. They're going to relapse on their agreements unless they have a support system. So what we want family members to be able to say is, you know, Michael, we want you to honor your recovery program and we're doing our work, right? That buys you street credit. And instead of saying, Michael, you should whatever, you say, hey, this is what I do when I'm under stress. I have these people from this family support group I call. I have my Al-Anon friends. I read this literature. I do this work. As parents, you know, what we do speaks so loudly, our kids can't hear what we're saying, right? So our behavior is going to speak more loudly than whatever words advice we're going to give them, right? So I think that there's a lot of, my experience is this, to be very frank, the people who stick in and do the work have much better outcomes. I often counsel people before they come. I'm like, I'm going to tell you to do some really hard stuff. Like, we'll see if you can make it. Like, are you going to be able to do the really hard stuff I'm going to ask you to do to set you up for success? And if you do, you're probably going to have some pretty good outcomes. And if you don't, it's a crapshoot. I don't think this has to be rocket science. There are people like you guys who have figured out how to do this. And not that not that it's paint by numbers, but you've figured out how to stand in your integrity, and it's accomplishable and it's doable.
If I could piggyback on that, Patrick, one of the other benefits of parent group is that you can be honest and you're not judged. It's very difficult to live in our society and go to a party and everyone's telling you how great their kids are, getting all these medals. And then you're like, oh yeah, oh, my kid's in rehab. Whereas when you go to parent group, you say your kid's in rehab, we are like, yay, they're getting help. So we have the opposite effect when we hear our parents' children are getting help. And I think that was instrumental in my recovery and my husband's recovery. And the other thing that I always say when I speak at these meetings is that you and your spouse or loved one, I guess it's your spouse or significant other, you need to be on the same page, because our addicts are brilliant people, and they love to play the parents against each other. And when you go to parent group, you learn to become more of a team. And I think that's really, really important. And the other bit of advice, Kathy's advice, is if you have a child with these co-occurring disorders, you're going to be seeing a lot of specialists, a lot of therapists, a lot of everybody. And something I got in the habit of is I had a typed up story, so that every time I meet a new therapist, I could send that to them ahead of time. So I didn't have to spend a meeting going over the family history. Of course, the therapist had the opportunity to talk to us, but this was extremely, you're talking at least I'm sure you all are the same way I am. Your time is limited, and telling your story over and over again gets a little hard, and then you tend to forget things. And that's just Kathy's advice.
Thank you, Kathy. And just a real quick note of clarification, we're mentioning parent support groups, and I know that not everybody who attends these programs is local. So they happen to be in the Philadelphia region. There is an abundance of them there, but I also want to mention there are Al-Anon, Nar-Anon. There's someone with us tonight who's with Families Anonymous. So there are other places to connect besides these parent support groups. We some of us feel that the parent role is pretty unique, dynamic, and sometimes in some of those other meetings, you're with folks that don't have quite the same lived experience. So that's why we tend to go that way. Michael, we have a question for you. Do you attend or recommend colleges with on-campus recovery programs? Great question.
Yeah, so my college does have they have sober living dorms, or drug and alcohol free dorms. And I personally don't live in them. I have never lived in them. And I remember my mom asking me, hey, do you want to live here when you go? I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm still on a college campus, and realistically, if I wanted to do drugs or if I wanted to drink alcohol, my dorm isn't going to be the only thing stopping me. That's not going to stop me from wanting to get my hands on those substances. So frankly, I don't quite believe in them, but in the event, that's obviously that's just my own opinion of how I feel towards them, but it definitely can't hurt. I mean, I purposely took a gap year in between high school and college, knowing that I wasn't ready to be in that environment. And I spent that whole year in family therapy and individual therapy. I had a drug counselor, recovery counselor, and also in AA and the 12-step meetings, working the steps with the sponsor. I did a ton of work over that year in order to be in a place where I felt comfortable enough that I could be in that environment. I just want to stress that the way I feel about that isn't applicable to everyone. I mean, in theory, it is very helpful to be in an environment where none of that is present, but I don't necessarily believe that just because they're living in a sober dorm that they won't be able to not access it on a college campus.
Just a quick note about that. So, you know, there's a thank you for that, Michael, and thanks for sharing the fact that that's what works for you. And everybody's journey is different, right? So there's a tremendous difference between a sober dorm and a collegiate recovery program. So theoretically, dorms should be sober because the presumption is you're pretty much most of the population is under 21. But there are collegiate recovery programs that are incredibly structured and have tremendous outcomes. There are more and more of them growing throughout the country. But they're a very structured program in that there's accountability, there are meetings, and they all have their own kind of flavor. But I mean, they have students who report like the highest GPAs on their campus. They're really focused. They have this built-in support system, and as I said, accountability, so that they work as a family, as a unit, and it's very different than like a dry dorm or a sober dorm. So just to make that clarification. And so anybody else have anything about that? Good. We have another question. Do any of the panelists believe that drugs can make someone appear to have a mental illness even when they actually do not? The drugs that have brought on the symptoms, drug-induced illnesses. Oh, and this is a nice shout out for Zoom parent meetings. Yes, we're meeting online on Zoom. So thanks, friend. Okay. Any thoughts about that, about the masking of?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. I did speak to the substance-induced psychosis when I was presenting. You know, many times the behaviors associated with substance use can, in fact, look like a mental health condition. And that's why the importance of getting people here and getting them sober for at least 30 days to sort of weed out, you know, how they're feeling and take away some of those symptoms, the behaviors, the signs that maybe that they were struggling. Now that they have been sober for 30 days, they start to feel completely different. You know, I gave the example of with depression, right? If a person is drinking every day, it's like the what came first, the chicken or the egg situation with alcohol and depression. Alcohol is a depressant, so it's going to make us feel worse. It's going to make us feel depressed. It's going to lower our endorphins, right? So take that away, and suddenly the depression starts to lift and our endorphins return to baseline, right? So maybe the person does not, in fact, have depression. Maybe they were just putting something into their body every single day that was causing them to feel that way. You know, with marijuana, and these are just examples, but marijuana can trigger substance-induced psychosis depending on how often and how much that person is using. It can cause the person to hallucinate, to see things that are not truly there. So is the person truly psychotic, or are they abusing drugs? Right. So I think that is, you know, one of the reasons residential programming is so important, is that it takes away any temptations. And we know that the individual that we are working with is truly sober.
Great, thank you. And I did want to address one last question that came in ahead of time, because it is so relevant today, right now, with what we're going through. Any recommendations for someone, any age, who is not feeling it with the Zoom AA meetings, NA, whatever kind of meeting that might be? Patrick?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that for a second. So, you know, I'm going to go on an AA soapbox for a second. AA started with people sending books from town to town. It was very limited in terms of meetings, right? So meetings is a little bit of a lazy way to recover, right? Recovery is really about sitting down with somebody else who you respect and admire and figuring out how to apply a program to your life, right? And living that program. So it's not about going to a meeting and drinking bad coffee. It's about getting connected and getting some internal solution and some life skills, right? And it's really a parallel process to the parent recovery program. So I have this often is people are kind of struggling with connecting via Zoom. I say, cool, don't. Pick up the phone and get connected with some guys or girls who have solid recovery, and they would be happy to help you apply these principles to your life, which would frankly, in my mind, be more effective than just going to a meeting. So I get it. You know, I go to a Zoom meeting. It's it's like a long distance relationship. It's not all that satisfactory, right? That's cool, but I talk to 3 or 4 dudes a day that are sober, and we help each other be and stay sober, right? So if you don't feel the Zoom meetings, that's fine, but get connected, because there are a lot of other people who feel similarly and have a same need, need set. And whether that's sitting outside at back of somebody's house, having a one-on-one conversation, whether it's a phone conversation, recovery is still accessible if we chase it. How far would that person have gone for a drink or a drug? And maybe do half of that, and it'll probably work out.
Awesome. Thank you.
I was wondering if I could just add one thing to that. When I'd still consider myself in somewhat early recovery. So when I was in earlier recovery, less than a year to a year, one of the biggest things that helped me, and Patrick touched on it briefly, was talking to a network, or having a network of like-minded sober individuals, whether it be male, female, or identifying in other ways. One of the biggest things was being able to talk to people that were kind of in the same boat. And, at first I struggled with it, because I would see, say, a middle-aged man named Patrick, and I'm like, well, I'm 17 and I don't necessarily think we're dealing with the same thing, so I'm going to toss this one off and not want to talk to him. But if you actually sit down and have those conversations, you can realize that you are actually fairly similar in a lot of aspects, and you develop eventually, once you talk to enough people, you develop a network that really helps you, and almost that you want to talk to, that you enjoy talking to, and you benefit from having those conversations. So given the times, obviously it would be appropriate to do it over the phone, or even if it's a small Zoom meeting with you and them and maybe another person. It doesn't have to be a full-on AA meeting on Zoom. If you prefer to just privately talk within your network, sober network, do whatever is going to help you. Yeah, that's it.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Someone had just asked for book recommendations, and I'll tell you, if any of the panelists have books that they'd like to recommend, we'll put them on that follow-up page. We actually have a page on our website called Recommended Reading. I will admit to you that it's overwhelming, because I've listed so many books and I tried to categorize them, but I figured I'll ask all of you if you have books that you recommend, and that'll at least simplify and make it not so overwhelming for our folks. We're a little over time, so I want to thank you all so very much for being here. I just love this panel. You did such a beautiful job. Thank you. And thanks to Newport Academy again. Please take the survey when the meeting ends. And we hope to see you again in 2 weeks or at a parent support group meeting. Take care, everybody. Thank you.